Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you. Please take your seats. Thank you. May I see a show of hands? How many people have already read Rich Dad, Poor Dad? Good. Thank you. Has anybody not read it? Oh, good. There's still a few customers out there. I'm glad to see that. I'm not going to be talking so much about Rich Dad, Poor Dad today, but I'm going to be on this program. But I'll be talking about this book here. It's our latest product called Teach to Be Rich. And in my opinion, it's a whole new direction for Rich Dad in many ways. We're going into trying to do our best to solve what I consider to be a massive, massive financial problem, not only in America, but throughout the world here. And when you look at the globe here, my personal concern is this growing gap between the haves and have-nots. And all throughout the world, no matter where I go, there's always people who are rich in every country, but there's also the poor, and there's also those that are, struggling financially. So this product, Teach to Be Rich, is really designed to help solve, and there's many causes of the problem, but one way of solving that problem is through education. So that's what this Teach to Be Rich product is about. And if I could explain what's happening in our school systems, there's many types of education, like there's music education, health education, cooking education, stuff like this. But to be successful in today's complex world and getting more complex world, we need 3 types of basic education. And one of them is academic education, which is reading and writing and arithmetic. It's very important that you be able to read and write. The second type of education is professional education. And when I was in school back in the 60s, if you did really well, you were A's, then you went to become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant. Since I wasn't an A student, I didn't go to those professions and things like this. But, and these two are very important. My poor dad was a man who really thought this was all you needed. He kept saying, go to school so you can get a high-paying, what? Job. And that's all my poor dad thought I needed. My rich dad, who was my best friend's father, he said if you wanted to be successful, you needed financial education. And unfortunately, as many of us know, our school systems teach us very little or anything about financial education. So I'm not saying that these are not important. I'm saying that today, just going to school, just to get a good, be able to read and write and have a job, is inadequate. What I'm saying today, in today's complex world, we all need financial education. So what this course or this program is about, and this Teach to Be Rich program is about financial education. It doesn't mean to negate any of this here. So if I could go into, I did graduate from high school and go on, and my professional education was, I learned to be a ship's officer. So I drove tankers for Standard Oil of California. And I also flew aircraft for the Marine Corps, U.S. Marine Corps, so I was a pilot in Vietnam. So I've had 2 professions. But I've never used any of them, very simply because my rich dad taught me this here. And the way my rich dad began, at the age of 9, began teaching me financial education was really simple. He just started playing the game of Monopoly. I remember as a kid, 9 years old, I'd go to my rich dad's office. I said, you gonna teach me you're rich? He goes, sure. And he'd break out the Monopoly board game and we'd sit there and play for hours. And he'd tick, 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 tick. How many people in this room have played Monopoly? Good. And I sat there, and then I'd go home and I'd say to my poor dad, the school teacher, I said, guess what I did today? I said, I played Monopoly. And he goes, oh, what a waste of time. Put that silly game away and do your what? Homework, so you can get a good, safe, secure what? job. So here, my dad saying Monopoly was a waste of time, and my rich dad saying this is a brilliant game. So I kept going back and forth, and that's why I'm schizophrenic today, because I don't know the difference. But the difference here is this: I keep playing this game of Monopoly, and then I go home, and my poor dad would say it's a waste of time. So one day I asked my rich dad, I'm only 9 years old, I said, why do you say this is so important? So he actually took me out, and he showed me, this is in Hawaii where I was growing up, he showed me what were the representations of his 4 green houses. He'd sit there like that. I said, what does this mean? He says, well, the formula for great wealth is found on the Monopoly game board. And most of us know the formula. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. So it started to dawn on me at the age of 9, my rich dad was playing Monopoly for real, and my poor dad, a school teacher, PhD, thought it was a waste of time. And so I was really quite confused. So then at the age of 9, it goes fast forward, at 19, I go to school in New York. I went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in New York. I got a congressional appointment for that. So I come back from school in New York. I'm now 19 years old, and my rich dad has bought the big red hotel smack dab in the middle of Waikiki Beach. And suddenly I went, holy mackerel, he's done it. In 10 years, he went from a poor man to a rich man playing Monopoly. And meanwhile, I go back to my dad, and he's still saying, be sure you get good what? Grades, and get a good what? Job. And that's why the whole difference is spanned. So one of the reasons I was able to retire at a relatively early age at 47, and my wife was 37 when she retired, was not because of what we learned here. And again, I'm not saying this is important. I'm saying it was because this is also important today. So at the age of 47, I retired very simply playing Monopoly. And today, I still play Monopoly. I think it's a really fun game, So my concern, and the reason I created this Teach to Be Rich program is because, as I said, all across the world, there's a growing gap between the haves and have-nots. The good news is, people in China and India and things like that, many of them, their standards of living are coming up. But the poor are still poor. And that's not that healthy. So if I show you a diagram here, this here is the year 2000, and this is why I'm concerned. In my opinion, and many economists and other people would disagree with me, right now the U.S. looks like this. You have the rich, and you have the poor. Okay. And this is the U.S., but it's a worldwide problem. And in here, you have the great middle class. My concern is that by the year 2020, and it's just going to start in a few years, it's going to look like this. In a few years, due to a lack of financial education in America, I predict that there will be more rich, and I intend to be one of them, but there will also be more poor. There will be an increasing number of poor. How many people know family or friends or co-workers who have nothing set aside for their retirement? Good, thank you. And that's what I'm concerned about. And what I'm really concerned about is this, I've been going into it as time goes on, is one of the reasons this problem happened is very simply because our school system still teaches us nothing about money. And people like my poor dad, a school teacher, always said the government should take care of you. And our problem right now is in America, from presidents on down, there are millions and millions and millions of people who are on the government handout. I mean, Clinton is on the government handout, every senator is on it, military officers, firefighters, soldiers, and everything. They're all on this government handout. And what I'm concerned about is America, which is a great rich country, will soon become a very poor country. Does that make sense, you guys here? And the reason we become poor is simply because we have so many people, not just poor people, expecting the government to take care of them. The concern here is this here is the middle class. And these are the guys that are going to pay for these guys here. Does that make sense to you? And I can hear some of you saying, well, it's not my problem because I'm still young. How many people in this room were born after 1964? Good. I want to thank you because you're the ones to be paying for my retirement. And these are the people that pay the taxes. So the reason I created Teach to Be Rich here is very simply because I predict, and I could be wrong, like in the next 20 years, even though it's a worldwide problem of this gap between the haves and have-nots, even in the richest country in the world, in the next 20 years, we're going to see a transfer going this way. So you'll see more rich people in America, but you'll also see more poor people. And in my opinion, what got us into this problem of this so many poor people in the richest country in the world is because we have a lack of financial education. In my opinion, the way out of the problem is also to increase financial education. So the reason I created this product here, and again, I'm not blaming school teachers. It is a system of education that has not, supported this here, and I think it's by design here, that we need this. So I'm asking every one of you at home and in this audience today is to consider it, is to learn to teach other people to be rich. And the reason we created this product is because I became a rich person by teaching. I've been teaching now since 1980, and but not in the school system. I wouldn't work for that pay scale. And I make millions of dollars a year as a school teacher. But the main reason is not so much to make myself money. The main reason I found teaching to be one of the best professions of all, and I didn't come across my profession until I was 40 years old, because I hated school. I found school the most boring, inhumane place. I didn't know I was stupid until I went to school. I said, what do you mean I'm stupid? So I would not create a product that is like the school system. For years, I have practiced and learned how to make education more fun. How to make it more entertaining, how to make it more effective, how to make it so the person learns something rather than sits there bored stiff and falling asleep all the time. So that's what they created this product for, but in the positioning statement on this book, it says, why teach to be rich? So regardless if you're a teacher or not a teacher, if you have a sincere desire to help solve this problem called growing poverty in America, but also desire to help yourself and help your family and your friends, because I suspect this is a very big problem. But the reason this Teach to Be Rich works is because the best way to learn is to teach what you want to learn. How many people ever found that out? That if you wanted to learn how to play golf, one way is to teach other people to play golf, except if it's your wife. You never do that. That's rule number one in golf. Don't teach your wife to play golf. But anyway, one of the best ways to learn is to teach. And the second reason for this product is, and the best way to get rich is help other people to get rich. Does that make sense to you guys here? So this is a product. It comes in basically 3 different parts. Number one, I'll go into the macroeconomics, because although I didn't do well in school, I did like history. And I studied history. For some reason, I really enjoy history. And that was one of the only few subjects I got A's in. The second part of this book here is, it's about education, is how we learn. And again, I'll say it, I would not ever ask anybody to teach the way our school system teaches. It is the most inhumane, boring way to learn. It only works for about 20% of the population. How many people are ever bored in school at times? How many people ever wondered, why am I studying this? Everyone wonders, how am I going to use this in the real world? Right? Well, this book sort of answers it. So this is a very practical book. So number one, it's about history, how we got into this problem. Number two is some of the lessons I learned after 25 years of teaching, how to make it more effective for more people, more fun. And number three in this program, you'll be meeting my real advisors, the people that really are the A students around me. It's like I said, one of the things I learned in school was the best way to get smart is sit next to the smartest girl in class, but the teachers always called that cheating, at test time, like this. But in the real world, that's called cooperation, and stuff like this. So later in this program, you will be meeting some of my real advisors. And again, as the introduction said, your financial advisor may not want you to look at this program. And the reason they may not want you to look at this program is because in this program, you will learn that some of the best financial advice is bad financial advice, like the advice of work hard. How many people are told to work hard? How many people are taught to save money? Good. For those of you who think saving money is interesting, stay tuned. You'll find that's one of the worst, most risky investments you can do. 3 is invest for the long term, or get out of debt. How many people have heard get out of debt? Good. You'll find out the people that win are people who are debtors, and savers are losers. And the 4th thing is invest for the long term. How many people have heard that one? And how many people heard the word diversify, diversify? Good. In this program, you'll find out why that is very bad financial advice, but the only reason it's good financial advice is because most people don't have this. It's good financial for these people, save money, work hard, get out of debt and all, but not for these people who have this here. So that's really what the program is about. My concern, again, is, like I said, right now in the year 2000, we have a strong middle class, the economy's booming, housing prices are up and things like this, but it's going to start shifting here. And the main reason it's going to start shifting is if we can go to the plasma up here, there are 5 major macroeconomic events that are starting to happen right now that may cause America tremendous problems. Number 1 is cheap oil. America has boomed up to this point because oil was cheap. Number 2, funny money. What I mean by funny money is the US dollar, after 1971, became the reserve currency of the world. The US government can print as much money as it likes and the world will take it. As long as the world will take it, we're okay. But the moment the world says we don't want this monopoly money anymore, it's toast. So there's a great book for those who have any questions on funny money. It's written by a friend of mine, Richard Duncan, and it's called The Dollar Crisis. And he goes into explaining why the US dollar, how it got to be the most powerful single currency in all the world. We have never been here before, ladies and gentlemen. We have never been here where there was one currency that dominated the world. And the problem with it, the federal government is printing it faster than any of us could ever save it. And so that's why I say funny money is going to change and it'll only change if the rest of the world says we won't accept it. And already the petrodollar countries like who have oil are now thinking about not accepting the US dollar. If that ever happens, we're toast. They'll start taking the euro and other currencies. If that happens, everything as we know it as this economy crashes, or at least changes. So that's why this book here, The Dollar Crisis by Richard Duncan, is a very important book to read. The 3rd reason why I'm predicting this is going to happen right over here is right now America has a very young labor force. The baby boomers, one of the biggest booms ever hit. It's worldwide. In America, there's approximately 75 million baby boomers. In 2008, which is only about 2 years away, the first baby boomer starts to retire. Number 4, China and Russia were communist back in the year 2000. Now they're capitalists. You have no idea what that means. You have no idea, because the oxymoron is something like military intelligence, postal service. Well, the oxymoron is Chinese communist, because I grew up in Hawaii, and most of my friends who are Chinese, they are not communist. My Chinese friends are all capitalists. They're some of the smartest money guys I've ever met in the world. In fact, Hawaii is owned by the Chinese today. They're so smart. And now that they're coming on, in 2001, China was allowed to enter the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and they're coming on strong. Russia's coming on strong. Eastern Europe's coming on strong. What that means for all of us here is this idea of a safe, secure job with benefits, like the transit strikes and all that. It's toast. If you're thinking right now that you can keep getting a pay raise, think again. Because the guy that's competing for your job now lives in China, India, or Russia. That's the problem with the world right now. And the 5th point, America is rich. Up to 2000, we're the richest country in the world. Will we continue to be that? I don't know. There's a good possibility that we might become, right now we're the biggest debtor nation in the world. And the only reason we're the biggest debtor nation in the world is because funny money. So I'll just summarize right now is the main reason I created this book is because we're making the shift right now. And I am concerned not only for myself and my family and my friends, but I am concerned about you. I wish I could say this book would help everybody, but obviously it can't. Because some people, when it comes to money, will never change. My concern here is this, that the middle class will be decimated by higher taxes. For those of you born after 1964, there is a prediction that your Social Security taxes alone will go from approximately 15% to as high as 50% just to cover all the old guys with no savings or retirement here. So I created this book, Teach to Be Rich, so that you can teach yourself and possibly your friends and loved ones, and hopefully some of you can make it out of here and into this category here. And that's why this book was created. Thank you very much.
Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
So welcome back, and before I go into Teach to Be Rich, the program, I thought I'd give you a little bit of my background on Rich Dad, Poor Dad for those who may not have read the book. For those who may not have read the book, because my name is Robert Kiyosaki, it sounds like Kawasaki. I wish it was Kawasaki. I'd be a worthless playboy in Tokyo spending daddy's money, you know. Anyway, I'm fourth generation Japanese American, which means I don't speak Japanese, or at least that's my excuse. And the reason I say that is almost in self-defense, because a lot of people have studied Japanese, and they come up to me at the breaks and go, "Hi, yes, ho, yo, yo, yo," you know? And I go, "I have no idea what you're talking about," you know. I barely speak English and things like this. Anyway, so I was raised in Hawaii, went to school in New York. Interesting thing is, this book has now been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. Only 2 other books have been on that list longer, and one of them is The Joy of Sex, which I don't know if I'm ever going to pass, but anyway, it's a tough subject to compete against. But the reason it's kind of interesting that it's on the New York Times bestseller list, you know, because anybody who makes the list for 1 week is considered good, but 5 years is almost unheard of. But as I flunked out of high school twice, simply because I couldn't write. And it's not that I couldn't write, my teacher did not like what I was writing. And as I said also, my father was the head of education for the state of Hawaii, and to have the son of the superintendent of education flunking out of high school, you know, all the teachers were in the back, you know, laughing. So I flunked out when I was 15, then I flunked out when I was 17, again for the same reason, because I couldn't write. And it was not that I couldn't write, the teacher disagreed with what I was writing. You know, so the definition of, I learned very early on that the definition of intelligence in school is, if you agree with the teacher, you're intelligent, and if you don't, you're an idiot, you know, things like this. So I rarely agreed, especially because I had 2 dads, because my poor dad always said, go to school and get a job, and my rich dad would say, you won't get rich that way. So that was kind of the paradox. My rich dad was my best friend's father, and although he was a man who started with nothing, he became one of the richest guys in Hawaii. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad is this very simple story of what 2 fathers tell their sons about money. And as you know, for those, how many people were told, go to school and get a job? And what my rich dad said, that's not the way you do it. So the book has been fairly controversial, but fundamentally what this book is about the subject of accounting and financial literacy, and why the rich are getting richer. That's what this book is about. And the reason I mention accounting is I did go to business school for about a semester, and what I flunked out on, again, was accounting. You know, it was the single most boring subject I had ever studied. You know, I used to wake up in accounting class, and my print was all blurred. And the reason it was all blurred is because I was drooling on it, you know, things like this. So for me to have written a book on accounting is quite, probably my accounting teacher and my English teacher are just, that guy, he did it again, So that's why I'm really happy to have my business partner, Sharon Lecter, as my co-author on this, because she's a CPA. So all you A students out there worry, well, how can you write a book on accounting? My co-author is a CPA, so that's how it's covered here, okay, guys? And the last thing about my poor dad was a very highly educated man, great guy, and he also ran for lieutenant governor of the state of Hawaii. And he ran as a Republican, which proved he wasn't that smart. But the reason I say that is Forbes magazine calls Hawaii the People's Republic of Hawaii, and it's been democratic for years, except until just recently. So my father was courageous enough, which I really respect him for. He was courageous enough to run against a very corrupt government, a government that believed in stealing and giving to themselves, And it's still, as we all know, that's part of government. And it's take from the taxpayer and give to your friends. So my dad actually had the courage to run against the governor. And because he ran against the governor in the 70s, the governor said he'll never work in the state again. So I have a tremendous love and respect for my dad because he's a man who stood up for his principles. The other thing, too, is I went to Vietnam twice, once in 1966 and then in 1970s. And the reason I went to Vietnam was, even though I was draft exempt because I was working for Standard Oil, if you work for oil, you don't have to go to war. And I think that's funny, personally, but anyway. Anyway, so I went to Vietnam because both dads, my rich dad and my poor dad, said it was a son's duty to fight for his country. So both my brother and I went to Vietnam twice. And I flew helicopters in Vietnam. And when I came back from Vietnam, that's when I decided I was going to listen to my rich dad and not my poor dad. Because my poor dad always said to me, go back to school, get my master's, get my PhD. And I said to my dad, what? Go get my master's and my PhD? He says, yeah, and then what? He says, then get a job with the government. I said, Dad, I think I'd rather go back to Vietnam. It's more honest. Anyway, so that's what Rich Dad, Poor Dad's about and all this. So going on, I'll quickly go into what my rich dad taught me, and it's really quite simple. Again, it goes back to my rich dad focused on financial education. And what he said was the key to being rich had nothing to do with money. He says what made a person rich or poor was their vocabulary or the power of words. So very simply said, he said that words either made you rich or poor. And he said the problem with education is that each of us as human beings has command of about 2 million, well, the English language is approximately 2 million words total. And each of us has command of about 5,000 words, that's all. So if you want to increase your wealth, simply increase your vocabulary. In other words, do you know the difference between ROI and IRR? There's very big differences. Or when your stockbroker says the earnings are up, or EBITDA, what does that mean? As I won't go into it, but EBITDA really, from my point of view, doesn't mean anything, but my stockbroker always throws it around like it's some big deal. It doesn't mean much to me, but you have to know what it means and doesn't mean. So vocabulary or words make you rich. So once again, I'll say it. When somebody says it takes money to make money, that is not accurate. It takes words or vocabulary. And like when I was in Sunday school, I heard, the words from Sunday school that the word becomes flesh. And that's how powerful words are. So my rich dad also forbade us from ever saying the word I can't. Like my rich dad always said, poor people always say I can't afford it. He says the reason poor people are poor is because they use their brain or vocabulary against them. He says you listen to poor people, they always say I can't do that, or I can't afford it. He says it's not that they can't, it's very simply they're not willing to. They're too lazy. I can't is a cop-out. So he forbade his son and I from ever using the words can't, and instead of using the words can't, he says, how can I? So like, how can I make $1 million? How can I become a billionaire? Not that I can't, or how can I afford my new Maserati or Lamborghini or a Porsche or house? Does that make sense, you guys here? So the most powerful piece of real estate, or the best asset you have, is actually your mind. And what fuels the mind are words. So going back to words and all this, this is an income statement and a balance sheet. This is the basis of accounting. And we'll go into why accounting is so important. This is also a financial statement. So a financial statement is made up of 3 distinct parts. One is an income statement, which says income and expense. The second is balance sheet, which is assets and liabilities. And there's a third document that's also important. It's called the statement of cash flow. And my rich dad used to say this word cash flow was one of the most important words an investor needed to understand, was where was the cash flowing. So there's 3 documents. My poor dad, because my poor dad always said to me, he says, our house is an asset. How many people have your parents that say that to you, or you say asset? And my rich dad would say that's why he's poor, is because he may be a PhD in education, but he is not very smart financially. He says he's using the wrong word to describe his house. So very simply, it goes back again to words. And my rich dad said assets, the definition of an asset is something that puts money in your pocket regardless if you work or not. So this is the cash flow pattern, this here, of an asset. So whether you work or not is putting money in your pocket. And a liability then is something that takes money from your pocket. So repeat after me. Assets put money in your pocket. What do assets do? Put money in your pocket. And what do liabilities do? Take money from your pocket. So think about this right now as you sit here. As you're sitting here at this moment, and you at home think about this, how much money is going out of your pocket whether you work or not, and how much money is coming in if you work or not. And that's the test. Is money coming in or money going out? Most people, the reason they have to go to work is because money is going out, because they have so many liabilities they think are assets. And that is the big problem here. So very simply, I'm not saying don't buy a nice house and all this, but the reason the middle class is in trouble, they keep buying bigger houses, and then as the price of the real estate went up, they keep using their house as an ATM machine. You know, it's $100,000, they pull more money out, home equity loans, pay off credit card bills. And the world says that's really smart because you're now paying off your credit card bills with your house. I mean, that's moronic because all you're doing is increasing the liability. Does that make sense, you guys here? Hello, you say that? That's very important. So the reason my wife and I were able to retire early and my rich dad got richer was he very simply kept buying more houses and properties and businesses that put money in your pocket. So I ask you to think about this right now. How many things you have are assets? In other words, if you, and let's say you're married, your spouse stopped working, how many things keep putting money in your pocket? And if you stop working, how many things keep taking money out of your pocket? That's what you know an asset or liability is. When I was in Singapore, I asked that question. I said, how many of you have good assets? And this woman raised her hand and said, I have an asset. I said, what is that? She said, it's my husband. He's a great asset, you know. Every month he makes lots of money. I said to her, I said, ma'am, I'm talking about a non-human inanimate object. And she says, that's my husband. So the point here is this, I'm not pushing real estate. Anything that puts money in your pocket, we'll be discussing some of those things that put money in your pocket. For example, you know, most people, their car is a liability. But if I use that same car as a taxi, that same car could then be an asset, okay? Well, we look at these books right here. Is every month or every quarter, Warner Books sends me a royalty check because they're selling my product for me. So this here is an asset also. Does that make sense, you guys here? Because it's putting money in my pocket. So that's very simply the difference. Okay. So that's the difference between assets and liabilities. Now, the big test here is this. When a banker looks at, you know, the bank, when you go to see your banker, as my rich dad said to me, my banker has never once asked me yet for my report card. My banker has never asked me, he said, Robert, did you have good grades? How many people have ever had your banker ask you for your grades? Some of you have. Interesting banker. My banker has never asked me what school I went to. When you go to see your banker doesn't really care about how academically smart you are. What they want to see is how financially smart you are. And the only way a banker can measure your financial IQ is by looking at your financial statement. Now, if you don't have a financial statement, and a lot of people don't because they don't know what it is, then they ask for a credit report. And I don't have a credit report because I have financial statements. If you're going to play the game of money, you really do need to have financial statements. That's a very big difference here. If you don't have financials, it means that you're not serious about money. So when a banker looks at your financial statement, this is your report card. As an adult. So a banker looks at it like this, and let's say they see here's a person A comes in, and the cash flow looks like this. I mean, money in, money out. The banker knows this person is a poor person. I'll say this again, it has nothing to do with money. It has to do with cash flow patterns. So I have a friend in Phoenix, he's a doctor, he makes about $400,000 a year. The trouble is he spends $400,000 a year. How many people know people like that? And he's really proud of it. He's a doctor. He says, but I have no debt. I rent, and I paid cash for everything. So he doesn't really have anything. He just goes out. He can't stop working, even though he makes $400,000 a year, because the cash is flowing out. So whether you're a poor person has nothing to do with how much money you earn. It has to do with how you spend your money, and that's the key. When you ask most bankers, they want to know how you manage your money, how you expense it. Poor people, very simply, spend money on poor things. And the middle class spends money on middle class things, like a nice house or a nice car. And what the rich spend in are investments or other companies and things like this. So it has very little to do with your income. It has to do with how you spend your money. So the next thing is this, the middle class, what they have is a big mortgage generally. And the word mortgage, again from the word mortgage comes from the French word mortir, which means death. So most people are in debt until they die. That's something what it means here. And then they have the nice car, they're looking good, and they have huge credit card debt, home equity loans, student loans, and all this. So their cash flow, the cash flow pattern of the middle class looks like this. So the banker looks at this and says, this person's nice middle class, good credit rating, they'll pay off their debt, but they'll never be rich, so I won't lend them much money. Okay. And then the third pattern is somebody who is rich, and they may have, number one is a business, then they'll own real estate, and then there's paper assets, there's the stocks, bonds, and things like that. And for me, there's royalties. And this is the cash flow pattern of the rich here. So one of the difference between the rich, the poor, and the middle class is very simply where the cash is flowing from. So those of you sitting at home right now, think about it this way. If a banker looked at your financial statement, looking at your cash flow, looking at your report card or your financial IQ, what's a banker going to say? Is this person poor, middle class, or rich? The reason I could retire early was very simply because I have assets putting money inside here. That's very simply it. I don't have mutual funds. I don't have a retirement plan. Got that? So I know this makes a lot of people crazy because many people think their house is an asset and it's a great investment. So I'd like to explain why I say that is not accurate for me personally, because most accountants would say your house is an asset and all of that stuff. But I think that's more easily explained when you look at the cash flow quadrant here. The quadrant is my other book, and the quadrant stands for E, S, B, and I, and E stands for employee, S stands for small business or self-employed, B stands for big business like Bill Gates, and I stands for investor. And what the quadrant is about the four different people that make up the world of business. When we go to school today, most people are going to school, go to school to get a job, and our school systems are programming our minds to be employees. Or if you're a really smart person, you go to school to become, a professional person, so as people say, something you can fall back on. So these are the doctors, lawyers, or restaurateurs, small business people, and all this. My rich dad programmed me or trained me to be a business owner like Gates or Oprah and things like this, and I stands for investor. One of the reasons so many accountants disagree with me here is because most accountants, what are they? E's, S's, B's, or I's? Most accountants are E's and S's. They're not professional investors. So what I say to people is this: as a professional investor, I must live and die by not my commissions or my fees or my brokerage deals. I must live and die by my cash flow. Every month, the cash flow is coming in. It's not a lot of money, but several $100,000 a month comes in whether I work or not. That's because I'm an investor. So I'll say this: it's due to a higher standard. So most accountants disagree, but most accountants are over here, and most accountants are passive investors. Most accountants have 401ks with stocks, savings, bonds, and mutual funds. If you're going to listen to this program, I'm going to take everybody to a higher standard. I'm not saying you have to go there. I'm just saying it's a higher standard. So going back again into the words here, the two words that I think are very important to understand right now is the most important word I said is this word here, cash flow. And this is cash flow. This is cash flowing into my pocket every month. Like I said, several $100,000 every month whether I work or not. And my expenses are very, very low. Most of them I just keeps coming in here. And the second type of reason, second reason people invest is for capital gains. Now, capital gains, what that means here is that you buy, let's say, a stock or a piece of real estate, and the price goes up. So let me show you this. This is cash flow, and this is capital gains. 90% of the investors invest for this here, hoping the price will go up, or capital gains. And that's why so many investors think investing is risky, because they have this little crystal ball, and they're asking not investors, but salespeople or employees of big Wall Street companies and all this, what do you think the market's going to do? You think it's going to go up next year? Or if you're in real estate, I bought this house for $100,000. It went up to $200,000. Should I sell now and all this? They're playing crystal ball stuff. And those are people for capital gains. I do this occasionally, but primarily I invest for cash flow. And as I said, it's a higher standard. It is harder, please hear me, it is harder to get cash flow. This is easy. This is a walk in the park. The average person will buy a house and say, I bought a house for $500,000 and it already went up $100,000. I said, how do you know that? So my broker told me. Does that make sense, you guys here? It's BS, blue sky. It's not real. But that's where most people are. It's really tough to get cash flow. I mean, from my experience, I have to work really hard to get cash flow. I have to be a better investor. So the reason most accountants say your house is an asset and all this stuff, or this is fine according to generally accepted accounting practices, GAAP accounting, is because most accountants and brokers, salespeople, are over here. But if you're going to play over here, it's a higher standard. So the reason people say your house is an asset is very simply explained like this. When your banker says your house is an asset, you have to look at this. A financial statement there have to be two of them. You can't just have one. So let's say you're Mr. and Mrs. Middle Class and you buy yourself a house, and what you have here is a mortgage. Like I said, mortgage comes from the French word mortir, which means death. There it is. Now, for something to appear in the balance sheet, it must balance. So you can't have this balance on the same sheet. The only way it balances, it can't balance on your sheet, it has to balance on somebody else's financial statement. So your mortgage shows up on your bank's financial statement over here, same mortgage. So over here it's a liability, but over here it's an asset. And so when your banker says to you, your house is an asset, your banker's not lying to you, the banker's just not saying whose asset it is. It's their asset. The way you know that it's an asset, again, going by the litmus test of this here, very simply, assets put money in your pocket and liabilities take money from your pocket. That's the test. That's the true definition of the words. You must use the right words. So my poor dad used the wrong words. He called his house an asset when it's really the bank's asset. So what happens here is the money comes in, hits the mortgage, it comes out the expenses, goes here, goes in here. I mean, it still doesn't go here, it goes straight up here. So the cash flow here is flowing out, which makes it a liability, but the mortgage over here is flowing in over here, which makes it an asset. And that's how you know. When you look at a regular financial statement, this is the most important line right here. Not how much money you earn, but the income coming in from your investments. That's what I'm looking at here. So that's the reason why I invest for cash flow and not for capital gains. Capital gains is gambling. It's gambling. When somebody says, I better get in and start buying because prices are going up. I don't care if it's stocks, bonds, real estate, gold. It is the most stupid thing you can do is invest for capital gains. It is gambling. But that's what 99% of the people do because they've never been trained to be investors. They don't invest over here. every month, I must have cash flow because I am a professional investor here. Does that make sense to you guys here? Where the passive investor, I'm an active investor, the passive investors are this. It's called this here. Oh, I hope the market goes up. I hope it goes up. It's going up. Oh, yes. You watch CNBC. Oh, market's going up. Oh, the Dow's up today. Oh, good, 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 good. Yeah, loser. Yeah, geez. There's nothing wrong with capital gains. When I invest, I first invest for this, and second, I want this. In other words, I want both. The average person is just happy with one. But to get both, you have to be a better investor, and most of these people haven't got the financial training to do that. So that's why accountants and lawyers and all that will say, well, don't listen to Robert, or especially your stockbroker will say, don't listen to him, or your real estate broker says, oh, don't listen to him. You can't get cash flow off of real estate. You know, because they're brokers. They're broker than you are. They need the commission. You know, they're not living off of, they're living off of, most brokers are living off of commission here. Whereas an investor is living off of cash flow here, and the gamblers are going for capital gains. And that's how you can see it. Once you can see it all the time here. So the last thing is this, don't just take my word for it. This is what Warren Buffett says about people who invest for capital gains. They hope the price is going to go up, uptrend stuff. Warren Buffett says the dumbest reason in the world to buy a stock, and this applies to real estate or anything, or gold or oil, the dumbest reason in the world to buy a stock or anything is because it is going up in price. That's what it means. And what Buffett is saying here is that most people are investing for this, where if you really want to be a professional investor, you're investing for cash flow. So one of the reasons I created Teach to Be Rich here is very simply because once a person gets into one of these patterns, it's really hard to get out. It's like a rut. So before a person can change anything, they've got to change what's behind their ears. Or if I could say, is this, as I said, I can tell whether a person's going to be rich or poor by their expenses really, really quickly. Poor people simply buy poor things. Whereas I was answering a question earlier, I was talking about, as a rich person, what I buy first are assets. I don't buy liabilities. My assets buy my liabilities. For example, when I wanted to buy another Porsche, I bought a piece of real estate, and the cash flow from that real estate pays for my Porsche. What the middle class, and the reason they're middle class, is the first thing they buy is lifestyle things. They want the nice house and the nice car. I have gone without eating, and I've gone without the nice house, because assets are number one here. And so what makes a person rich, poor, middle class is what is number one for them. For the poor, number one is just pure survival. For the middle class, it's looking good, keeping up with the Joneses. And number three are assets. And when I talk to a person, I can tell really who they are simply by what they're buying, but also what it shows up here. So the reason I'm getting for creating Teach to Be Rich, as well as a cash flow game, is they are designed to bust up the patterns inside your head, because if you don't change the pattern, nothing really changes there. So moving forward, again, because our school systems don't teach us much about financial education, we learn that at home from our parents. So on the plasma screen over here, you're going to find out what the poor teach their kids about money. So the poor, like my poor dad really sincerely, he thought, I'm a good man and the government should take care of people. How many people know people like that? The government should take care of you. And so that's why he believed in a government job. He believed in, Social Security, and he believed in Medicare. But as I'm saying, the reason I created this Teach to Be Rich program, as you're going to see by the end of it, is the debt for a number of people, starting with the president on down, expecting to be taken care of, is going to wipe out a great country like the United States. But as I said, it's also a problem throughout the world, because all over the world, the rich are taking from the poor, actually, through taxes and things like this. So that's what the poor believe in. And what the poor person is, as I was answering your question, is the poor are basically non-investors. Poor just simply believe the government's going to take care of me, or the company's going to take care of me. And that's why they're poor. They have a very poor financial mindset. It doesn't mean they don't make a lot of money. My poor dad made a lot of money. He was a very high-paid government official, but he never invested it because he thought investing was risky. And you'll find out in this program that investing is not risky. The second group is the middle class. What they believe in, this is their financial education, a good education, a high-paying what? Job, a big house. Your house is your most important investment and asset, and they all believe in that. And a pension. And a pension either comes from the government or 401k or something like that. And those people are basically they're passive investors. So they invest, but they turn their money over to somebody they hope and pray is smarter than they are. And unfortunately, most of the time they aren't, because they're turning their money over not to investors, but they're turning their money over to people who are salespeople, not investors. And what the rich believe in, this my rich dad taught me, is number one, he says, be an entrepreneur, like Bill Gates and Oprah, and be an investor, an active investor like Buffett or Trump. So what Teach to Be Rich is about is for people who want to understand how to be entrepreneurs and how to be active investors, not passive investors. So that's what this program is really designed for. If you still want to put your money in a 401k and all that, this may not be the program for you. But stay tuned, because I think you'll find out that the 401k or those pensions or mutual funds or stocks or savings or bonds are the riskiest of all investments. And that's what happens to passive investors, where active investors want higher returns with less risk. So one of the problems with being a passive investor is that so many people come up to me and they go, I have $25,000, what should I do with it? And the first thing I say is, if I were you, I wouldn't tell anybody you have $25,000. Because if you don't know what to do with your $25,000, there's a lot of people that do, you know. And generally what they're going to do is tell them to put it in their pocket. And this is what this program is about here, is this, is many times the people giving out financial advice are not rich people, but salespeople. This is what Warren Buffett has to say about financial advisors. And this is on Warren Buffett says, Wall Street is the only place that people ride to in a Rolls Royce to get advice from those who take the subway. And that is my experience. So as this program rolls on, you'll be hearing that the idea of work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest for the long term, and diversify is really bad financial advice, highly risky financial advice. So that's why at the start of this program I said, you know, be careful, because your financial advisor is going to say, don't watch this program, because this is the advice they give. My rich dad said this. He says the reason they're called brokers, like stock brokers, real estate brokers, insurance brokers, is because they're broker than you are, you know. And they have to live on their commissions and things like this. There's nothing right or wrong with it, because I still use brokers. The problem is most people do not know, because they're passive investors, because there's no financial education, they don't know a good investment from a what? Bad investment. They don't know a risky investment from a safe investment. They don't know a good advisor from a bad advisor. And that's what this program is about. It is designed not to sell you any investments, but hopefully to improve your financial intelligence, your financial IQ, to make you a better investor and make better investment decisions. Thank you very much.
Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
So welcome back, and I'm going to be moving into now a little bit of history, but also why the world is changing so much. So a very important year is 1974. And the reason 1974 is important is, according to my opinion, it was a shift when America and the world shifted from socialism to capitalism. Now, I know most people think America is a capitalistic country, but it's really highly social in that it believes in the government should protect and take care of people. And now moving to capitalism is changing. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying it's changing. But 1974 was the year I came back. I got out of the Marine Corps after 5 years as a pilot in the Marine Corps. And I went to my dad. And as I said before, I asked him, what should I do with the rest of my life? And my dad said, go back to school, get your master's, get your PhD, and get a job with the government. And I went, oh my God. So at that point, I went to Waikiki to see my rich dad, and I said, what should I recommend? But the saddest thing about 1974 when I talked to my poor dad was very simply, my poor dad in 1974 was saying, go back to school with my PhD so I could get a safe, secure job. And my dad was unemployed. He was about, 1974, he was about 50 years old. And the reason he was unemployed, like I said before, he ran for lieutenant governor against his boss, the governor. And the governor said to my dad, you will never work in this state again. In other words, you will never get a job here. So here's my dad. He did all the right things except stand up for his conscience and run against a corrupt government. And at that point, he never got a job again. So that's why at that point I knew I'd better listen to my rich dad. And I went to see my rich dad, and I went to see him, and I said, I want to follow in your footsteps, not my poor dad's footsteps, and I want to be an entrepreneur and an investor. In other words, I didn't want to go over here with my PhD. I just wanted to come over here. So he said, I said, I'll be an entrepreneur. The first thing he said to me, he says, if you're going to be rich, you're going to be an entrepreneur, you must learn how to sell. And that was my first real awakening to the real world. He says, if you can't sell, you'll never be an entrepreneur. He says, that's what entrepreneurs are doing all the time. And I had this really negative block because my family, being school teachers, thought that salesmen were the scum of the earth. I had to go against my family's biases about salespeople, and I got a job with Xerox, and for 2 years I was the worst salesman Xerox had. And then 4 years later I was #1 in sales and things like this, so I learned that. But that's why 1974 was so important to me. But even on the world scheme, 1974 was important because that was the introduction of a thing called ERISA. And ERISA stands for Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which led to, back a few years later, to a thing we now know as a 401k. This came out about 1980, so 74 to transition to that. And I think the primary reason I do this Teach to be Rich and all this stuff, and I created the Rich Dad Company, is because of this act over here. It is one of the biggest changes that we have had in the world today, but very few people have taken notice of it. Because the 401k is a very significant little investment type of vehicle. The reason the 401k is so important is because it is probably the riskiest of all investment vehicles. You know, your banker won't lend you money for it. You can't get insurance on it. And not only that, it only will work for about 20% of the population. If you're making less than $150,000 a year, it is doubtful whether the 401k will provide enough income for you when you need it. So the reason the 401k in 1974 is so significant is that why this is important, like I said, was the shift from socialism to capitalism, 1974. But what it signified was this, was that the companies, the big corporations, were no longer going to take care of the employees. That's what it meant. Up until this point, my poor dad had the right idea. Go to school, and the company and the government will take care of you. 74 was so important because basically the big corporations were saying, employees are too expensive, we're not going to take care of anymore. So we're not going to protect the employee. So the employee suddenly had to come from here to over here as passive investors. And they have no financial education, which is really why I'm upset with the school system, because even though the world changed, our school system still teaches us very little about money. And I always say, you know, rich or poor, smart or not so smart, we're all going to use money, so why doesn't the school system teach something about money? But even though the 74 change happened here, nothing happened. And that's, like I say, how many years is that? 25, 30 years ago that change happened. Our schools still do not teach us anything about money. But this is what's happening in America today. USA Today did a survey, and they found Americans' greatest fear is running out of money during retirement. And that fear is now caused by this 1974 change, because people now realize that a 401k is not a pension. A 401k is now a savings plan. And the difference between a pension and a savings plan is this, is pensions will take care of you for your rest of your life. A savings plan will only take care of you as long as you have money in the account. So that's why USA Today found the greatest fear is that. Then the Fox network did the same survey. They wanted to find out what the greatest fear was. It said, is terrorism a greatest fear or retirement a greatest fear? And what Fox found out, these are approximate numbers, Fox News, they found out that about 22% or 26% thought that terrorism, Al-Qaeda, was the greatest fear. 60% thought that running out of money was the greatest fear during retirement. And the reason that is happening, again, for this change right here. And so that's why I created this book, Teach to be Rich here, and all this, is because there are millions of people who are afraid of running out of money during retirement because our schools haven't picked up the slack of the change of 1974. I believe it is this law change that the reason I created Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the Rich Dad Company, the cash flow games. And in the year 2002, I wrote this book here called Rich Dad's Prophecy. How many people have read this book here? Good, a lot of you have. It's not as popular. This was not a very popular book because this book was written about the 1974 change. And all of my predictions in this book, many Wall Street companies came after me. Many magazines came after me. They absolutely trashed this book. They called me a quack. I didn't know what I was talking about. But it is, I think, not the most popular book, but the single most important book for many people. So, again, this was 2002. And then in 2005, 3 years later, the New York Times says the same thing that prophecy says. Exactly the same thing. So this is 2002, this is 2005, and it says here, we regret to inform you that you no longer have a pension. That basically what they're saying is that these people after 1974, pension plans became one of the biggest sources of funds for the rich. They just take money out of it, and the middle class and the people who put money in there don't get anything inside of it. So this is the New York Times, October 30th, 2005. Then October 31st, 2005, Time magazine said the same thing. It says, the great retirement ripoff. Again, saying the same thing my book and prophecy said 3 years earlier. And it says here, millions of Americans who think they will retire with benefits are in for a nasty surprise. How corporations are picking people's pockets with the help of Congress. That's what these articles are about here. So they say the same thing prophecy says here. This is 2005, this is 2002. So that's why I created this product here, Teach to be Rich, and my cash flow games, is because of this right here. Because what has happened in the world is so many people then, because of 1974, were forced to become passive investors. And I'd like to show you on the screen what the difference between a passive investor is and an active investor. So number one, a passive investor, one, they have no control. And this whole talk is about control. The next segment, I'll go into what control really is. Next is higher risk. They invest in the highest of risk investments. The highest risk investments are savings, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. They're the riskiest of all investments, but most people think they're safe for some reason. And you'll find out today that they're the riskiest. Number three, the banker will not lend you money for your 401k or mutual funds. If your banker doesn't trust them, why should you? That's the test. Don't believe my word, ask the banker. Number four, insurance agents will not insure your 401k against losses. As a real estate investor, I'm not pushing real estate, I had one of my buildings burned. Thank God nobody was hurt, but the insurance company replaced it and replaced my rent and all this. I never invest without insurance, but millions of people, due to that 1974 change, moved over here as passive investors. They have no insurance, and they're putting their money into investments a banker would not touch. Number 4 or 5, higher taxes. The 401k is one of the least tax efficient of all investment vehicles. 401ks only work if you're planning on being poor when you retire. The reason I don't have a 401k is I plan on being rich when I retire. Because when I put money into my 401k, when I retire, let's say at age 65, when I pull the money out, it comes pulling out as ordinary income. If I have a lot of money, ordinary income is one of the most highest taxed of all incomes there is. It doesn't make any sense for me because I make so much money, I might be paying 40, 50% tax on that money. I'd rather be in real estate where I can pay 0 tax. That makes more sense to me. So that's why I don't have a 401k. And this is all part of the financial education. I think they should tell kids early so they don't take a job with a 401k and do something else. Number 6, they always worry about market crashes. You know, they're always worried about it, and they're always asking their financial planner, you know, what do you see in the future? You know, the stock's going up, stock's going down, prices coming up, prices going down. You know, that's gambling. That's not what I do. Number 7 is they have very low returns. This book, Unconventional Success, is written by a man named David F. Swenson. If you don't take my word for it, take his word for it. He's a chief investment officer for a company called Yale University. This guy's a very smart guy. It's a great book. But he says this, that mutual funds have not done any returns over the long term. The reason I'll go into a little later on, the reason mutual funds have not had high returns is because the fees they take out of them. I'll be going into that a little later. So if you insist on investing in paper assets, I would buy this book here because it's a great book. But he goes into why investing for the long term in mutual funds absolutely makes no sense, even over the long haul, because there's almost zero returns in them. Not zero, but very low returns. Number 8, the plan can run out of money. As I said, the problem with the 401k, it is not a pension plan, it is a savings plan. Number 9, you may never retire with a 401k. As I said, the 401k might work for about 20% of the people. As long as you're making over about $150,000 a year, it will not work for those making less than that because you just can't put enough money aside. And that's one of the problems with that. So those are some of the challenges. And what I'll show you the comparison now is between an active investor and what makes an active investor different is that an active investor, number 1, has control. That is the whole crux of this course here. Financial education, financial information means you're taking back control. What people are doing is right now, they're going around saying, I got $25,000, what should I do with it? What should I do with it? You know, they don't have any control. Number 2, they're a lower risk, and I'll go into why the risks are lower if you're a passive investor. Number 3, I use my bank's money, OPM. One of the ways you get rich faster is don't use your money, use somebody else's. Number 4, I use insurance. I don't invest without insurance. I have to have some kind of escape valve in there in case I'm wrong. Number 5, I may pay 0 taxes. One of the reasons I love real estate is I got the biggest tax breaks, and it's fabulous. I mean, I can make millions of dollars and pay 0 in taxes, or at least defer. Number 6, I welcome market crashes. Most people are afraid of market crashes. Like, I can't wait for the next market crash because that's when I'm going to buy again. The passive investor lives in fear of crashes. Number 7, there's unlimited returns, and I'll show you a couple examples where I get infinite returns. Number 8 is that I can provide for generations because my wealth is just constantly recurring. I can pass it on for kids, all this stuff. Number 9, I may retire early, and I retired at age 47 because I had financial education and no job. And so those are some of the differences right now. So with that, I'd first like to bring up Scott and Michael come up. Michael's my attorney. He's the author of OPM, Other People's Money. And Scott McPherson and I did this tape, is How to Get Your Banker to Say Yes. So Michael, would you give a little bit of background on this book here real quickly?
Question for you. You find a great deal. In order to get into that deal, you need $1 million. You don't have $1 million. What are you going to do? Do you walk away from the deal? The answer is a resounding no. You use other people's money. There are lots of different forms of other people's money. Scott will talk about some of them. There are different requirements for the different forms of other people's money. Some of them, different types of other people's money will be more applicable to different types of deals. This book is about that. Now, when you bring in other people's money, do you necessarily have to give away the store? There will be a cost. Okay? Again, the answer is a resounding no.
Okay.
Okay?
So the point here is this, is one of the skills I had to learn as a young man was how to raise capital. It became one of the most important skills. So many times people say to me, well, I can't afford it. They find these great deals, but they go, I can't afford it. Rather than say, how can I raise the money? So one of the things that makes the rich richer is I don't use my own money, I use other people's money. Or as my rich dad said to me, he says that only lazy people use their own money. So when somebody says, well, when do you use your own money? The only time I use my own money is when the deal is so good, I don't want anybody else in it. When the deal is shaky, I use other people's money. That's generally the rule of thumb there.
Now,
right?
nobody is saying that money is going to magically appear. But we will tell you that if it is a good deal, you can always find the money.
Even if it's a bad deal, sometimes you can find money. So,
This is true.
yeah, thank you. And so Scott McPherson is my banker. Anytime I have any questions on how to raise money or on especially real estate, I mean, this is my man. He is my banker, and he and I did this CD audio program is how to get your banker to say yes. But before you go talk to the audience here is, as a banker, do you lend money for mutual funds?
I do not.
Why not?
The primary reason, and you hit it on your screen just a second ago, is lack of control and too speculative and too much of a risk. And if I could, Robert, for just a second,
please.
I'd like to show you an interesting scenario. In this particular case, it doesn't matter if it's a single-family home or an income-producing property, where we place a loan on the asset, we may loan 80, 90, 70%, maybe 100% of the value of that asset. Because it's a tangible asset, it makes sense, there's income and cash flow. For example, let's just say I'm the bank at that point. However, if you were to go buy my stock and I'm the bank, and you were trying to borrow money to buy that stock, you may be able to get 50%, maybe on a margin account to buy the stock of the bank that just loaned 80 or 90 or 100% on that single family home or whatever the asset was. So the difference is, in my mind, is you have something that has cash flow and control and a manageable risk that you can wrap your hands around going back to my stock, which I'm the one who loaned the money over here, but if you were to buy my stock, now you lose control, much higher risk because I'm making good or bad decisions, who knows, and the best you can do is probably borrow 50% of the value of that stock at best. So.
No.
Okay, now let's say that Scott's only willing to lend up to 75% of the value. Are you out of the deal? No. You bring in a different type of other people's money. You bring in co-venturers, partners. You put up part of the money, they put up part of the money, you make some other contribution. Let's say you tie up the deal. You have an intangible right to purchase this asset. You think in terms of forming a business. Your contribution is that intangible right, and perhaps part of the money.
Okay, so Scott, let me ask you this question. As a banker, Michael's an attorney, Scott's a banker. Do you want to lend money?
I want to lend money because, as we saw earlier, when I loan money, that's an asset to my bank. I also want to help you do what you want to do, but you have to help me get to that level and get me comfortable that you're able to borrow that money and pay me back, because that's really what I want. But I don't make a dime unless I make a loan to you. So I do want to loan money to you.
Right, and so many people are afraid to come and talk to you, right?
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
So what Scott covers in this, how to get your banker to say yes, is how to prepare to see your banker. Because a banker's job is to say yes, because you don't make any money if you say no.
No, it's good.
Okay. So let's have a hand for this gentleman. Thank you very much here. So, in conclusion, I want to say really quickly up here, I'll just show you how this whole thing works. If you're playing the game of Monopoly, this is what a banker does. This is Monopoly. You buy one greenhouse, it's putting cash flow. Monopoly teaches you this right here. The difference between cash flow, it took it to the next level of understanding this. I'll just show you how unrisky, if you're an active investor, is. Like, I don't like savings, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, because the risk is so high. My banker won't lend me money on it. This is a land deal that Kim and I just did a few months ago, and it's really quite a simple deal. And when somebody says things are risky, I don't know where the risk is. It's 10 acres of land. The price was $100,000. The reason I use this example is most people can afford $100,000. Okay. Now, The reason I bought this property is very simply when I looked at the listing agreement, again it goes to the words, it had the 2 letters MH on it. Now there's a lot of land around this thing. That what made this land more valuable than the rest? What made it more valuable was the words, MH. MH stands for manufactured housing. When I saw that, I dropped to my knees, again broke out the rosary beads and said thank you. Because the words made this more valuable than all the other land around it. Why that made it valuable is that because manufactured housing means, let's say I could break 10 acres into 50 lots, and I sell each lot for $25,000 each. The stepped up value on my property then is $1.25 million. How many people would pay $100,000 to make $1.25 million? That's how simple it is. Where's the risk? You know, and the reason I say it's an infinite return is the moment I found this deal, naturally my friends who can't find a deal wanted me to give me the money. So let's say I gave them the money, so I have zero money into it. I give them half the deal, which means I make about $500,000. So I make $500,000 on zero of my money. I use other people's money. And that means my return is infinite. Does that make sense to you guys here? Nothing to that. I don't know where the risk is. So when people say to you, investing is risky, generally it's one of these people over here who is not an active investor. This is done all day long. It took Kim and I about 20 minutes to find this thing. We saw it there, bam, done. It's not a big deal. It's not a Donald Trump deal. But $1 million is $1 million. You can still spend it that well. And the last thing, more real life examples, is this my wife Kim did, is that she found a piece of property not far from our house. I think Scott helped finance this one. It's a commercial building, and it was so undervalued that they wanted $8 million for it. Because it was undervalued, we borrowed 100% of the money. And the reason we borrowed it was very simply because every month this property put $30,000 a month cash flow in our pocket. Again, this is not a big deal, but $30,000 a month, you can live on that much. You know, it's not that bad. But the reason I use this deal as and we do about 1 or 2 of these a year, and it's not that hard to do. But the beauty of this is the banker gave us all the money here. It took us, like Michael says, 2 different levels of financing to do it. So we got 100% financing. Now, the reason I say this is to all the people who are the savers of the world. I ask this question: how long would it take you to save $8 million? And one of the reasons the rich are getting richer is because they know how to use other people's money or debt to move forward here. So it's not $8 million for the savers. A saver would have to save approximately $16 million to get this kind of loan, because the government's going to take 50% of it. The beauty of using debt financing or equity financing, things like this, is, please listen to this, all you savers of the world. You're not going to get ahead by saving. A people who is borrowing and understands how to be a professional investor, it took my wife 2 weeks to find that money. And I asked the average saver of the world, how long will it take you to save that much money? For most people, $8 million or $16 million might take a number of years. Okay. And then the deal's gone. So the moment Kim found this deal here, she just tied it up, and that was the money. So the savers lose, the debtors win. And that's one of the big differences of learning how to use other people's money, how to have a friend like Scott McPherson or Michael Lecter on how to borrow money and things like this, because the savers are losing big time right now. So before we go into the next subject, I want to bring up my one of my best friends, but also my investment partner in real estate, because the question I was asked during the break is, how does a person find a deal that cash flows? And I hear that a lot from people, especially now that people are coming into the market late. But there's still millions of deals around that you can find that cash flow. So before I answer that question, I'd rather bring up my business partner here. Is author of the ABCs of Real Estate Investment. It's Ken McElroy. It's a big hand for Ken, please. This is his book. Why don't you give a little bit of your background before we go on?
Sure. Well, like many of you, I started off investing in one single-family home and condos primarily, and then eventually started buying larger and larger properties. And I've been in business for a little over 10 years. We have two construction companies, two management companies. We're developers. We have a short-term housing company and a realty company now that feeds our company, which we bought last year about $150 million worth of real estate for all different kinds of things. We develop it, we buy it, we enhance them. We're doing some condo conversions all over the West Coast. So primarily that's what I do now. I have a large presence throughout the West. We have about 250 employees now and offices throughout the West Coast. And my partner, Ross McAllister, primarily handles the construction, and then I handle the management operations.
So this is my question to Kenny, because so many people say, well, how do you find a great deal? And the reason is that there's a difference between a passive investor and an active investor. Passive investors, because they're basically, either they cannot see the deal, or they wouldn't know a good deal if they saw it, or they're basically lazy. They just go to the broker, the financial planner or somebody says, do you have an investment for me? And naturally they do. It's generally mutual funds, stocks, or bonds, and they're always readily available. Real estate is different because you have to really look, or even in stocks, you have to look really hard. So my question to you is this, how many deals do you look at a week?
I personally look at least 30 a week, probably. I look at 4 or 5 a day, I bet. And they take me anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes each because I know what to look for.
Right. And how many of them are bad out of 30?
30.
And I think that's the biggest difference, is that, to find this deal over here, I probably looked at 100 deals. And then one day I stumble along, and there it is, sitting there. I mean, this is what they call a no-brainer, right?
Well, part of looking at deals is part of your financial education and understanding all the different parts of the deal. And that's really where I get my education, as Robert does too. Some of them are land, some of them are retail, some of them are office, some of them are multifamily. And so through that process, you learn quite a bit when you make a phone call or ask questions. And then eventually you find something like this.
Yeah, we're looking constantly. That's what an active investor does. A passive investor just buys that junk that guy has to sell you. And most of the stuff is being sold by those financial planners. In my opinion, those mutual funds are junk. They will not make you money. They cost you money. That's why I'm not saying it's right or wrong, you guys. But I said, if you're going to be an active investor or a passive investor, you really need to make that decision. And active means you're constantly looking at deals, constantly analyzing them. It's 24/7. You're still running numbers in your head when you go to sleep, right?
Well, the great part about it is no matter where I am, even when I'm on vacation, I'm looking at deals, no matter what city I'm in, and it's a blast.
Yeah. And then I spent a lot of time in Australia, and I'm always looking. And no matter where I am throughout the world, China, Singapore, Canada, Europe, South America, Africa, they always say something. They always say, well, you can't do that here. No matter where I go. You can't do that here. And the reason they can't do it is because they're passive investors. They haven't trained their brain to see. No matter where I go, I'll find a deal that I can, make it, improve it, work it, or do something like that. And that's the difference between an active and a passive investor. Anything else you want to say?
Well, yeah, that's exactly why I wrote this book, because as you'll see later on, that the fundamentals are really the same everywhere.
All over the world.
All over the world, they're the same. Income minus expenses minus debt is cash flow. It's the same no matter if you're in Hong Kong or you're in Phoenix, Arizona. It doesn't matter. And that's why I wrote this book, because it walks you through that process.
And one of the things I think is really funny is that, because Kenny his business partners are like Lehman Brothers and Goldman and the big houses. As I said, the story of the father that gave those 3 boys the money. If you know how to multiply money, the banks of the world will give you the money. Is that correct?
Well, that's been the interesting part, is my balance sheet, of course, has grown over time, but there's more money. The last deal that we did, actually, Scott helped us with it. We had 9 people bidding on our project to lend us the money.
How much was it? How much were they lending you?
I can't remember. I think it was somewhere around $50 million. And we were looking at the best deal for us. So we were looking at the terms and the rates and the payouts and things like that. as part of our financial model to decide who we wanted to accept money from.
But the reason they're giving you the money is because you know how to take $1 and turn it into 10, right?
That's right, and because we had the team behind us.
And that's really the skill a person has to learn. So many people want to do what Kenny does or what I do, but they're not willing to put the time in. They're passive investors, not active investors. And the thing that's even funnier is because Kenny's always in the marketplace. You know, we're in Scottsdale, Arizona, Kenny's developing this condo project, and everybody's crying the blues. I can't find a deal that cash flows, and Kenny has this condo conversion right on the main road in Scottsdale with the best piece of property in the Arizona area, and yours will cash flow, right, even if I buy them.
And we just bought it 2 weeks ago, 300 units.
Yeah. So one of the keys to finding great deals is you got to have friends in the industry. It's called insider trading. You know? Well, you know, in the stock market, that's illegal. In the real estate market, that's perfectly legal, right?
Absolutely.
So that's how I find deals. It's, again, like I said to the gentleman, it's who your friends are, who you spend your time with. If you're spending time with people over here, like accountants and attorneys and all that who are non-investors, I think you're nuts. If you want to spend over here, that's where you find the deals are, because they always tell their friends first, right?
Well, and I think it's been mentioned before, there is so much money to be given to you if the deal makes financial sense. You need to decide how it makes financial sense. And that's why I wrote the book, because it walks you through what's a good deal, what's a bad deal.
Good. Give a big hand for Kenny, please. Thank you. So again, would you take 1 minute to discuss that? Look, ladies and gentlemen, there's millions and millions and millions of dollars right in front of you. But if you haven't trained your brain because you only have academic or professional education and no financial training, then you'll always be poor. You'll always think, well, it takes money to make money, or I don't have enough education, or I'm not rich, and all this stuff. Unless you change what's up here, nothing's going to change. Like I said, this project took probably 20 minutes to spot. It's a piece of raw land. And this one was right across the street from where Kim and I live. You know, it sat right there. And the bank gave us the money for it. 100% finance, put $30,000 a month in our pocket. And the property has gone up in value, but we don't really care, because all we really want is every month is $30,000. Why we want $30,000 a month? Is because then we're free. We don't have to work for the rest of our lives. But we can do this time and time again. But we're active investors, not passive investors. You guys got that? You got to pay your dues. Put in your homework. Or you can be lazy like most people and say, well, how come you can't tell me about that deal? If I find a great deal, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to buy it myself. Right? I mean, you should do the same thing. So please discuss that. You have to do the homework. Got that? Please discuss that really quickly, and then we'll move on.